Okay, great. So can everyone hear me, or is anybody not able to hear me at this point?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Victoria. So thanks everyone for coming. My name is Julia, and I will be leading our seminar today, where we'll be talking about a little introduction to debate and getting you all on the right steps towards our first competition. At any time, if you have a question, please feel free to just unmute yourself and just interrupt me. Questions are the way that we all learn, so I would prefer that you ask them while I'm speaking as opposed to waiting at the end. You also can try to do the raise hand function. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see everybody, but feel free to do that, or you can post questions in the chat. So just to get started, I figured I would tell you a little bit more about me. I'm also going to be turning off my camera just because I've been a little bit sick, so I don't want anybody to, get the wrong impression. But to start off with just a little bit about me, so I will be the Best Foundations Debate Coordinator for this academic year. I'm really, really excited about it. Also, I am serving as the Fulbright English Teaching Assistant in Dobrich, which has been really awesome so far, and I hope some of my students are here in the audience. I've been participating in debate for a while now, about 7 or 8 years, both as a competitor. I debated for the University of Miami, and also as a judge and a coach, predominantly working with the Urban Debate Leagues, which are nonprofit organizations based in the United States. So I'm very excited to bring my debate experience to you all and to kind of help best in the students really, solidify their debate experience and have a really great time. So just to talk about some of my goals that I have for the year, and I know some of the student leaders should also have hopefully passed these on to you. So my first goal is to create interesting and engaging debate motions with student input. I think that making motions relevant, but also accessible to students is really important. So I'm excited to release those very soon. Secondly, I'm excited to work with the judge training coordinator to improve judge quality so that we can make sure that the people that are evaluating your rounds are prepared and consistent and objective. Third, I'm excited to provide more resources and trainings such as this seminar and materials to help you all feel more confident and prepared going into debates. And lastly, I'm excited to help any interested students apply for and compete with the national debate team, which your coaches can tell you more about, or I'm happy to at another time. So the structure for this presentation or for our seminar is going to be as follows. So first, we're just going to talk about debate in general, an introduction to that, and then we'll dive into the World Schools debate style, which is the debating style or the format that we will use here at BEST. Then we'll talk about argumentation and how to make arguments, especially in the context of debate. Then we'll move into our engagement and clash. So how we talk with the other team, how we engage with them. And then lastly, if we have time, we'll move into judge scoring. So knowing how you will be evaluated as by the judges in the debate rounds. If I have any questions before I move on. Okay, so let's start with intro to debate. So what is a debate? Debate is an organized activity in which two sides participate in a structured discussion about a specified topic. In debates, teams present clear arguments for or against the topic, regardless of their personal opinions. Traditionally, this looks like teams preparing both sides of a debate topic or a debate motion so that they understand both sides of the argument, and then, only taking one side that is determined actually at that tournament. And then in an academic debate, an objective judge decides the winner. So there was always a winner and a loser. So some of the benefits of debate are that students are able to gain knowledge of world issues. Also, they're able to improve English speaking skills. So don't be worried if you are not what you think is the best English speaker. Debate is a great opportunity for you to practice that both with your teammates and at tournaments. Debate also helps you to develop critical and analytical thinking skills. So being able to think through problems and solve or talk about issues that are important. It also helps you to improve your research abilities. Since the form of debate that we're doing is a team activity, you'll see some of our debate teams at our summer camp here in this picture. It teaches you how to effectively work with the team. And then because, as I mentioned earlier, students are going to be taking or researching at the very least different sides of topics or motions, it helps you to learn to respect others' viewpoints and kind of put yourselves in another person's shoes. So the last topic that I'll talk about that's pretty general to most forms of debate is the importance of note-taking, or in debate terms, we call this flowing. So taking notes or flowing in debate is extremely important for competitors and judges alike. Flowing helps students to keep track of arguments and prepare rebuttals. It is kind of a visual representation of what's happening in the debate. So I'll look for or create some flowing note-taking worksheets that you all can use or copy so that you can, kind of have this structured form of note-taking. It helps you to see which arguments are extended throughout the debate. So it's talking about a flow, which means like how the debate flows along in the process of it or the cycle of it. So you can see by you taking notes, which arguments are brought back up and therefore are important and you probably should reference. Similarly, you can also see which arguments are dropped, or which also means that they're unresponded to or not brought back up again. And in specific types of debate, which we'll talk about later, that could have implications for whether or not they're valid arguments or reasons that a judge can evaluate the team or the debate. And lastly, flowing is important because it can help you identify clashes. So if you are taking notes in a specific way in which you're able to see when one team responds to an argument that the other team makes, and then say that goes back and forth a little bit, then you see, oh, here's a clash. Here's a point where the teams are at contention, and that helps you later on in the later speeches when you're looking to point those clashes out for the judge. So that is a general introduction to debate. Are there any questions now before we move into talking about world school style? Okay, so now we'll move into world schools debate, which is the type of debate or the format that we will be using here at Best Competitions. Just a little bit of an overview to hopefully put you all at ease. So this debate style was particularly made for high school students. So I know that debate can be very nerve-wracking or it can seem very intimidating, but know that this format was specifically made to be accessible and understandable to students that are your age. It's very exciting because this debate format is competed in around the world. So there are a lot of international opportunities for students that understand world schools debate to continue, competing on that international level through things such as the national debate team, which we've talked about. And then lastly, which I think is pretty exciting, is that World Schools offers a mix of prepared and impromptu motions, which means it gives you the opportunity to both, do your research beforehand and understand what your, very strong arguments are, while also giving students that might be better at off the cuff or better at thinking on their feet, those opportunities to shine when you're just working with impromptu motions, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So the basics of World Schools debate. So there will be 2 teams of 3 students each, and these teams will be from separate schools. So at your school, you will most likely have 2 other teammates that make up your team, and you'll compete with them during each debate or round at the debate tournament. The style has 8 speeches in total, so each team will present 4 speeches. The topics of the debate, they change each debate or each round, and those are called motions. An example motion might be, this House believes that Facebook has done more harm than good. This house believes that, which is this little acronym THBT, is a common wording in World School Debate Motions, which is just talking about just a general governing body or a general group of people that believe a certain thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But basically, this motion would be about whether or not Facebook has done more harm than good. Do I hear a question coming? Okay. So at our debate tournaments, we will have most likely 5 rounds, 2 prepared rounds and 2 impromptu rounds, which will be in the preliminary, which everybody will be competing in. And then there will be a final round, which will also be a prepared motion. There is a potential, depending on the number of entries that we have, that there may be a semifinal round, but that is not determined yet. So we know that for sure there will be at least 5 debate rounds, 4 of which everyone will compete in. And in the final round and potentially the semifinal round, it would be the top teams, the teams that have won the most. So something that's different for this year is that all debate rounds in the preliminary round, so these first 4, will be one pool or one group of people. So all of the novices and all of the varsities will be in the same competition circle for these first 4 rounds. But there will be the opportunity for something called power matching, which we think is going to be a better way to ensure that teams that are at similar skill and ability are going up against each other. Because historically, we've had some really, really great teams in novice that have steamrolled all of the other novice teams. And we've also had some pretty not so great teams in varsity that have just really not been able to practice or get better because they've just been going against really good teams. So this new process that we're going to be doing, which is called power matching, means that after the first debate round, all teams that are at the similar or the same win or loss ratio will be competing against each other. So teams that have won one debate will go against teams that have also won one debate. Teams that have lost all debates will go against teams that have also lost all debates. And then as the rounds continue, it just keeps continuing. So in the third round, the team that has 3 wins and 0 losses will also go up against a team that also has 3 wins and 0 losses. After the preliminary debates into the final rounds, there will be novice and varsity breakouts. So 8th and 9th grade teams will compete against other 8th and 9th grade teams, and then in the novice breakout round. And then the 10th, 11th, and 12th graders in the varsity division will have their own separate final round in order to kind of keep that separation in terms of novice and varsity at that end level. That was a lot of information. Any questions? Okay. So again, we talked about how in debates there are topics that are pre-specified. So in World School Style Debate, these topics are called motions. And what's special or unique to World School Styles Debate, which is similar to other sorts of parliamentary styles, are that motions should be interpreted in a reasonable manner with arguments discussing the core of the controversy areas. So this is a lot of words, but it basically means that when the motion is given, teams should try to debate what the general interpretation of that motion is. They shouldn't try to talk about something that's really far outside the motion, and they also should not try to talk about a very, very, very small portion of that motion that makes it difficult to debate on the other side. So there are 2 types of motions, which I talked about. The first are prepared motions. So these are motions that are given a month in advance. So they are coming out on Friday. I think they'll be posted on the website and maybe the Facebook page. And these motions are more research oriented, incorporating more statistics and evidence because teams have the opportunity to research them, prepare their cases and stuff like that. And then the other set of motions are impromptu motions. So these are motions that are given at the tournament, and teams are given 30 minutes to prepare. So there are a couple of tricky things about this that are a little tricky, but also a little bit fun. So teams have to work just within their team. So just the 3 students that are competing are the ones that are allowed to prepare. You're not allowed to use outside resources like your coaches or other people on your best teams. You're also not allowed to use the internet. And this is to encourage students to kind of do that critical thinking and evaluate emotion or evaluate the side of the argument in a manner that is kind of more value oriented, or one that's not really influenced by other people's opinions that are, you're finding on that you might be more focused on with the prepared motions. Yeah, I think that's about it. So again, we'll have 2 prepared motions in the preliminaries, 2 impromptu motions in the preliminaries, and then 1 prepared motion for the final. So some key terms that will be helpful as we continue in this discussion of the World Schools Debate. So first is the proposition. So the proposition is the term that we use to reference the team that supports the motion. So the team that is proposing the motion or is in favor of the motion. Naturally, the opposition is on the other side of that, the team that opposes the motion or is opposing the proposition. And then we've already said that the motion is the topic of debate. And as I mentioned earlier, that phrasing of "this house believes" is a very common phrasing. It could be "this house believes," "this house regrets," "this house supports." It's basically just talking about a general governing body. And typically the proposition or the team that supports the motion is going to define what that house is. So it could be like this house as the EU, this house as the Bulgarian government, this house as United Nations. So just some sort of governing body that typically the proposition will define depending on the motion itself. So the speaking order in World School Debate, that's what you'll see in this graphic over here. So as I said, there are 8 speeches, 4 on each side, and the proposition starts first. So the team that is proposing or in support of the motion. So the proposition starts first, and then from there on, each side takes turns. So prop up, and so on. Except at the very end, which is, these are called the reply speeches. So up here, these are the constructive speeches, the first 3 speeches on each side. And then here are the reply speeches, which are shorter. And in this, you'll notice that the opposition actually speaks back to back. So the third constructive speaker on the opposition side is followed immediately by the reply speaker. And this is so that the proposition speaker speaks last. So it alternates until the very end where the opposition goes next and then the proposition goes last. So these again are called the constructive speeches, and they each last 8 minutes long. And then in the reply speeches, they're much shorter and 4 minutes. But you're probably wondering, if a team is only made up of 3 people, who does the reply speech or the last speech? And this speaker can be either of the first 2 speakers from each team. So it can either be the first or the second speaker of the proposition, or the first or the second speaker of the opposition. Each speech has a different role, which we'll cover very briefly in this presentation and in more depth in the next seminar that we have next week. But just knowing that in the beginning of the debate, I think that's here. Yeah, in the beginning of the debate, during these first speeches on each side, that's where each team is building up their arguments and introducing what their opinions are on the topic. And then as we get later into the debate, that's where teams kind of crystallize or make the debate smaller to identify key issues that the debate is about. And in the last speech is where they're persuading the judge about why their team has won the debate. Okay. Any questions?
Can you explain it again for the rules of each speech?
Yes. I will move on to this page. Does that help a little bit? And we'll talk about this. So here, so here are the roles of each speech. We are not going to go into too much depth of this just for in the sake of time. But what we'll see here in the first proposition speech is where the team that proposes the motion is going to introduce the motion. They're going to define key terms. So who is this house? What do we believe the debate is going to be about? They're going to offer arguments in support of their team, and they may also set burdens, which means saying, here's what we have to do to win this debate. The first opposition team will go next, and they will kind of discuss the key terms in the model or whatever the first proposition has proposed. They're going to rebut the first proposition, so say why maybe some of these arguments are not good or not true. And then they will offer their own arguments. The second proposition and the second opposition follow a similar format, which is rebut, defend, and extend their own arguments, and then offer new arguments. Similarly here, and then in what we call the back half of the debate, or beginning with the third proposition all the way down to the reply speeches, that's where you begin to identify key issues. So summarizing those clash points and explaining why the team has won. So that finally in the opposition speeches, in the reply speeches, you're going to give an overview of the debate and explain why your team has won. There's a specific formula that we'll use for each of these speeches that I will also pass on to your coaches to talk about this in more depth. But does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay, and thank you for that question earlier. So that was a very basic introduction to World Schools Debate, and now we will be moving into argumentation. So how to make an argument and what argumentation means in the context of debate. So an argument is not just what you do at the dinner table with your brother, but in debate, it is a set of claims and evidence that supports a certain point of view. So arguments are not neutral. They have an intent to convince people to accept the arguer's point of view. And they can also be made up of different types of content. So they can be emotional, they can have narrative or story-based argumentation, they can be logical, you can incorporate examples or case studies or statistics, facts, precedent. So an argument we'll go over an example of an argument that we would use in debate. It is incorporating a lot of these different types of content into a certain structure that supports an overall claim. Okay. So let's look at the basic formula for making an argument, which is has three components, which are claim, warrant, and impact. So the claim is basically the argumentative statement being made. It's a debatable observation, but it's what a team presents as what they believe. So an example claim could be winter is better than summer. The second part of an argument is the warrant. So why is the claim true? Usually you provide data to provide support for the claim. So an example warrant could be in the winter, it can snow and playing in the snow is fun. So that's the claim, winter is better than summer. Warrant, in the winter, it can snow and playing in the snow is fun. And then lastly is the impact. Why the truth of the claim matters. Why is it important that winter is better than summer? So for our example, people have a better experience in winter weather. This creates better communities and trust. So the three parts of this sample argument include the claim, the warrant, and the impact. And this is a very simplified or bare bones structure, but it's important because it shows that you're able to say specifically what your claim is, identify the support to back it up, and then explain why it matters that your claim is true. So we're gonna do a little practice now. If everyone could either get out a piece of paper or if you want to just do it in your head, is to please use the claim warrant impact model to generate arguments for the phrase school uniforms should be mandatory. So you can either generate arguments that support this statement or oppose this statement. Again, making sure that you have a claim, a warrant, and the impact for that claim. I'll give you all about a minute to do this, and then we'll get back together. Okay, maybe about 20 more seconds to finish it up. Okay. Does anybody want to volunteer to share their claim warrant impact model for the phrase school uniform should be mandatory?
I can volunteer.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria.
Okay, so my claim is that by doing this, we can fight against inequality, and this means that there is in a lot of places, let's say that there is a financial inequality among people, so that we can we can do something to cope with this issue by making uniforms mandatory, and as an impact, we can have a better outcome, and we could reduce maybe this inequality can cause depression among teens, let's say, or students, and by doing this we can reduce the just this we can reduce and these depression levels or rates, and have a nice way to deal with this issue, and hopefully some make the situation better, let's say. Okay. That's my idea.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria. That was a really, really great example. And I love that you kind of specifically said like you said, this is my claim, here's because, and here's the impact. Thank you so much. Alexandra, do you want to also give us an example, please?
Yes, thank you. So my opinion on that, case is that by having students get dressed the same every day, they kind of slowly get pushed towards being more responsible, as by doing a small thing like getting dressed the same in their uniform every day, they learn to take care of their responsibilities, and that then makes an impact on their school work, as by learning to be responsible, they are also responsible about other stuff in their lives.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexandra. That is something that I did not think of, but it's definitely a very, very good point. Okay. Joanna, do you want to close us out, please? Thank you.
We can also oppose this claim, right?
Yes.
Okay, so in my opinion, I think that the school uniforms should not be mandatory, they can be pretty expensive at times, and some families can barely make ends meet. They don't have the financial stability to give their kids a couple of uniforms because they're most definitely going to get dirty, and one is not going to be enough. In my opinion, they should just not be. They should be given an option whether whether they should wear certain clothes or not.
Awesome. Thank you, Ioana. That was a really great opposition statement, and I think it's pretty persuasive. I see a couple other people volunteering, but just in the interest of time, we are going to move on. If you want to put your model in the chat just for me to check it out, see if it's all good, feel free, but obviously no pressure, and thank you, everyone. So this was the example that I had, but I think, so we'll look over it really quickly, but I think that our volunteers pretty much gave us some great examples. So the claim that I had was that school uniforms are better for mental health. The warrant that I used were that school uniforms lessen the chances of students getting bullied for what they wear. And the impact I have is that victims of bullying suffer from psychological trauma and social isolation that can cause long-term damage. So this was really similar to the first example that we heard. Any questions about this argumentation model, claim, warrant, impact before we move on? Okay. So now let's look at argumentation in the context of debate and how we can use it as debaters to make our positions or our arguments strong. So to start, I think it's important to understand in this debate what each team's goal is, and then we'll talk about how arguments can support that goal. So in a debate, the proposition teams, so the team that supports the motion, their goal is to prove that the motion is true. So they can do this by giving examples of the motion or giving a model or what we call a mechanism. So for example, the school uniforms topic, they would say that students in kindergarten through 8th grade need to wear a polo shirt and khakis, and then students in 9th through 12th grade need to wear a tie with a button-down shirt and khakis. So kind of defining what the motion is and giving that model or that mechanism to make what the debate is more clear. And then where the difference is that the opposition team or the team that opposes, their goal is to disprove the proposition. And there's a difference here. So what the prop team's goal is to prove the motion, the opposition's team's goal is not to disprove the motion, but instead to disprove what the proposition gives as their interpretation of the motion. So the opposition in our example would need to disprove the model given by the proposition of kindergarten through 8th grade graders wearing polos and 9th through 12th graders wearing ties. They don't need to disprove the idea of, say, all students wearing ties to school or all students wearing suits. It's just whatever the proposition says. Okay. So let's look into some terms before we go into some more arguments. So in World Schools Debate, the term team line is something that's very unique. And it is kind of what the team's overall theme or thesis is for or against the motion. So all arguments that a team makes should be in support of their team line. The case is the team's set of arguments that support their position or their team line. So if we have the team line up top, we have a team's case that supports that, which are probably 2 to 3 arguments. In a team's case, it's made up of something called substantive matter or positive matter, which are arguments that discuss the pros or the positives of your perspective. And they're also made up of rebuttal or responsive matter, which are arguments that discuss the cons of someone else's perspective. So your arguments against what the other team is saying. I know that these are pretty specific debate terms, so if you're new to debate, don't necessarily worry about them. Sometimes it's just easier to present these ideas earlier on, so if you hear them, you can recognize what is being talked about. But by no means you have to have this memorized. I know I'm presenting you with a lot of information, so you can always look back at this later, talk to your coaches about it, and most definitely after the first tournament, you will have a much better understanding of how everything that I'm talking about fits into the context of debate. This is pretty high level, so don't worry if you're a little lost right now. So argumentation in debate. So just to kind of reiterate some things that I talked about here. So both teams make arguments in support of their individual team line. Usually each team has 2 to 3 pieces of positive or substantive matter that are developed in their first 2 speeches, which I talked about when we were looking at that diagram in those constructive speeches. These arguments can, but don't have to, have 2 to 3 subpoints or components that break down their arguments further. So kind of thinking of like a 5-paragraph essay or any sort of long essay or paper structure. Teams also incorporate rebuttal or responsive matter beginning in the first opposition and second proposition speeches. So once the other team speaks, the other team responds with rebuttal or responsive matter, typically at the beginning of their speech, and these arguments directly engage with the other team's arguments. So here is an example case structure. So again, the case is the set of arguments that supports the team line. So at the top, at the beginning, we have a team's overarching thesis or their team line. Underneath that, you have substantive matter or positive matter, which are individual arguments that support the team line. Here I've included 2, but teams can also have most likely 3. Beneath each argument or piece of substantive matter, you can have subpoints, which are just kind of further breakdowns of each of these major arguments. So subpoint A, subpoint B, and same here. Something that I haven't mentioned yet is kind of how we're able to see this structure in action in debates. So something that I really like about debates is that since it is a verbal activity, and teams are, the judges and the other opponents are not necessarily given a copy of the other team's speech. What we see happening in debates is something called road mapping and signposting. So if you're imagining you're going on a road trip and you take out a map and you road map, so where are we going to go, and you draw a point from A to B. And then along that way, you see signposts, okay, this way to Dobrich, this way to Varna. It's a similar structure when you're giving a speech in a debate. So teams provide a roadmap, which is an overview of what arguments you're going to be making or what you're going to be talking about. So teams will explicitly say, our team line is this. I will first be talking about my first piece of substantive matter, which is this. And then my partner, Bailey, will be talking about our second piece of substantive matter, which is this. And then as the speech goes on, you'll continue to flag those points or signposts. So once you're starting your first piece of substantive matter, you say, my first piece of substantive matter is this. First, I'll be talking about subpoint A, which is this. So we'll look at an example of that here. So back to our school uniforms debate, and we're looking at an example case structure for school uniforms. Our team line, which is here at the top, would be that school uniforms for a proposition team. School uniforms benefit children in the short and long term. And I'm going to give you what my roadmap might look like for this. So our team line is that school uniforms benefit children in the short and long term. And we have 2 arguments in support of our team line. Our first argument or piece of substantive matter is that uniforms improve the classroom environment, which I will be talking about first. And then in our second speech, Bailey will be talking about our second piece of substantive matter, which are that uniforms are better for mental health. Going back to my first piece of substantive matter, we have 2 subpoints. The first subpoint is A, that student uniforms lessen distractions that are caused by clothing. or individual choice. And then maybe I'd go in and share statistics or share examples or personal stories. And moving on, I would say my second subpoint or subpoint B is that with school uniforms, there would be fewer incidents of classroom disruption due to dress code violations. And then I would incorporate evidence, statistics, yada, yada, yada. And then in a similar manner, in the next speech, my partner, Bailey, would discuss how uniforms are better for mental health and how they reduce bullying and reduce the appearance of class and wealth disparities, which, funny enough, is what somebody else already discussed in their example earlier. Okay. Any questions about this example case structure? Okay, so I think that this type of case structure is really helpful for students, especially new students, to kind of begin when they're given a motion or given a topic to start to organize their thoughts. It's also really helpful for people that are in impromptu motions or those rounds so that you can kind of take a breath, think about how you can organize what arguments are floating around in your head and kind of put them into this structure. So maybe we can make some worksheets or something and share those with your coaches. So in summary, for argumentation, we've learned that arguments should not be unorganized or jumbled thoughts, but instead should support the team line in an organized structure. Arguments should not just recite statistics and data without giving context, but instead should analyze data and statistics or evidence as part of an overall argument. Arguments in world school debate should not be outside the core of the motion, but instead should fall within a reasonable interpretation of the motion. And then lastly, arguments should not be discussed in a vacuum or without regard to the other team's points, but instead be impacted or weighed against the other team's arguments and impacts, which we will talk about in this next section. So I had this example that you all can watch on your own time that shows kind of a very high level world school debate, and you could kind of see some of the things that we're talking about. I'll post the video on the event page later so that you all can watch it and see how some of those things that I'm talking about are coming up in a regular debate. So that is the end of our introduction to argumentation portion. And next we'll be moving into engagement and clash. But does anybody have any questions before I move on?
So I have one question. So
Perfect.
when we give evidence, right, when we give statistics and such stuff, we should always state the resource, right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when we're citing statistics or data, it helps to cite where you got the resource from. So maybe if it was done by a university or a specific scholar, and anything relevant that you think would support like the credibility of that source. So you don't have to say it was performed on X date by these 15 researchers, but saying like a study done by Sophia University in 2020 shows this, and then you talk about what it says. It's a good question. Okay, bye, Sophia. Thank you. Okay, anybody else? I just got a direct message. Okay, so let's move on to engagement and clash, which is the other, I guess, core component of debate. So clash is vital to debate as it is what differentiates debate from informative speaking. So clash, or when you're interacting with the other team, it demonstrates that one team is listening to the other team, understanding their arguments and actively engaging with them. And teams should clash with each other during the entire debate by using refutation and rebuttals, points of information or POIs, and argument comparison, which we'll go deeper into in the following slides. So refutation. Refutation is kind of how you refute or respond to the other team's arguments. There are a bunch of different ways to refute somebody's arguments, but we'll focus on 3. The first is via rebuttal, or proving that the other side's arguments are incorrect or invalid. So pointing out faulty logic, questioning whether or not evidence is good enough, stuff like that. The second is mitigation, or proving that the impact that they're discussing is not sufficient or is not as important as what they're talking about. And then lastly is comparison, or comparing impacts. So again, when we talked about the structure of an argument, it ends in an impact. So why is my impact more important than their impact? And these are just some ways. So whenever you're hearing an argument, you can kind of run through this little structure. So questioning their logic or questioning their evidence, maybe saying why they're exaggerating and mitigating the importance of their argument. And then lastly, comparing, why is my argument more important than their argument? A simple rebuttal formula that is used in most debate formats, and especially what you can use in the first few speeches, are first starting with a statement of the summarized counter argument. So what did the other team say and how can you summarize it, just so that the judge knows what you're referencing, followed by a statement of your position and why it differs from the other teams. And then lastly, using evidence to support your position. So in practice, it's something like, they said blank, our position is blank, here is evidence to prove our position is correct. Questions on this rebuttal concept? Okay. We are kind of at I want to make sure that we're able to get through the scoring position portion of this. So I'm going to leave this potential example up here now. So kind of thinking about what rebuttals could be for this proposition, which is we should ban casinos because gambling is addictive and people don't realize that when they start, you have to save them from themselves. So we're not going to get a chance to kind of share this now, but if you want to just take a quick note of this so that you can practice a rebuttal later, that would be awesome. And then moving on to when teams clash with each other in debate. So in the first one, it is constructive speeches, also in points of information, in third speeches, and in reply speeches. So in constructive speeches, rebuttals are given typically before the team's substantive matter or before teams present their own arguments. And typically they follow the rebuttal formula. So a team might say, in their last speech, the other team said blank, our position is this, here's evidence to prove our position is correct. Also, our second piece of positive or substantive matter directly rebuts this. So before they get into what their own arguments are, teams will traditionally rebut what the immediate speaker before them had said. Usually this will be for about 1 to 2 minutes. The other unique part of world schools debate and other types of parliamentary debate are something called points of information. So maybe some of you noticed is that there's not a specified time for teams to directly do cross-examination or questioning of each other. So there's not a time for a team to ask a question outside of a speech, which is why points of information come into play. So these are opportunities to offer a piece of rebuttal mid-speech. So while someone is speaking during one of the constructive speeches, opponents are able to stand up physically in the round or raise their hand to offer a point of information to the speaking team that the speaker may or may not accept. If the person is called on, then that person that is asking the POI or giving the POI will have 15 seconds to ask a question or say a statement that relates to what the speaker is saying. Some technicalities are that this can only happen between the first and 7th minute of each speech. So the first and last minute of each speech is protected, so you can't ask POIs. And it's only during those first 3 speeches on each side. It's only during the constructive speeches, not during the reply. And then, as I said, teams can choose to accept or deny POIs. Generally, the common way is that each speaker should accept 1 to 2 POIs per speech, and then they'll give a 30 to 45-second response. So teams, it can be really frustrating when a speaker is not answering your POI, but just knowing that they don't have to, they should just generally accept 1 to 2 per speech is the, I guess, rule of thumb. Any questions on POIs? Okay. Now looking at the back half of the debate, or the second part of the debate, when we're looking at the third constructive speech in the reply speeches, this is where the debate starts to get smaller. So in the first 2 speeches, that's when arguments are being presented and the case is being built. And then starting in the third speech, that's when teams identify clash points in the debate or areas of contention or where the teams disagree the most. These are the 3 key areas, and then the speaker explains why their team is winning those 3 areas. This continues in the shorter reply speeches, which is an opportunity to clarify the debate. So teams want to isolate for the judge which are the most important issues and why your team is winning them. And then lastly, state the reasons the judge should prefer your arguments to the other teams. So this is where that comparison comes in. Questions about engagement and clash during the debate? Okay, so again, I look into the same example speech that I will post in the Facebook that I think would be helpful. But in the last 5 minutes, I'd love to just talk quickly about scoring. So just knowing how judges will be evaluating teams. So there are 3 contents of us, or 3 sections of the scoring module. Style and content are both worth 40% and strategy is worth 20%. Style is how the speaker speaks, so inflection, intonation, speech, volume, etc. Content are the arguments that are being used in the speech, and strategy is where we think about timing, structure, and whether the speaker understands the issues of the debate. So thinking about those clash points. Regular speech, so the constructive speeches are worth between 60 and 80 points. The reply speeches are worth half of that because they are less time, so 30 to 40 points. A good POI, or point of information, can be adjusted to 0 or 2 points. And traditionally, points are only given in half marks. So 60 and a half, 70 and a half, no, like 72.3. We don't need to go that deep. And then in this type of debate, the team with the most points wins. So each team, the team that wins the debate must have the most points overall. So that means no low point wins. And teams can't have a tied number of speaker points. They have, because that would indicate a draw. Okay. So that is the bulk of my presentation. I just have some like upcoming dates and resources coming up. Are there any questions that you all have before we move on to that?
I have one question.
Perfect.
For instance, do a judge takes away a point if a speaker doesn't answer a point of information, for instance?
That's a great question. So since points of information they're at the speaker's discretion, or the speaker gets to choose if they take it or not, traditionally, judges should only take away points if students are not answering at least 1 or probably 2 points of information per speech. Okay. Stefania?
Hello. My question is because I was looking through your site and right now you're explaining the rules of the debate, but I was wondering, how do we get a coach? Is there like a team that we can join? Because I'm very interested in that and I just couldn't find it on your website.
If you want to send an email, either you can stay after to chat with me after this, or you can send an email to info@bestfoundation.bg, which I'll type here in the chat,
Okay.
to kind of explain your circumstances, and we can hopefully connect you with the coach soon.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, yep. Any other questions? Okay, so some important dates coming up. We'll have 2 more seminars this semester. So next week at the same time, next Wednesday, the 20th, we'll have a debate preparation and strategy seminar. So here we'll be talking about kind of diving into what each of the speeches looks like and what the structure of them should be, and kind of strategies we can use in the debate. And then the following Wednesday on the 27th of October, also at 8 p.m., we'll have a motions briefing. So kind of discussing the motions and the topic areas and kind of talking about what the core controversies should be. Some other important dates. So as I said, on this Friday, the motions and the topic areas are going to be released. So you can start getting start researching that. And then our tournament dates for the Western regions are going to be the 12th of November through the 14th of November. And then the Eastern schools will be the 26th through the 28th. I see that we have some participants from outside of the organization. If anybody is interested in judging, so people that are out of high school with a sufficient English capacity and you're interested in judging, please send an email to that info that that email address that I put earlier, and we will get you connected because that would be great. I see some questions, Brenna.
Hey, so I was just wondering, are the debate topics that are going to be posted for both the East and West tournament or just the West tournament?
They are the same.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then Stefania, do you have another question or is your hand just still?
Oh, no, sorry. I was just.
That's okay. Okay, awesome. So that is my presentation. Thank you again all so much for coming and joining me. I hope that you feel as though you've learned a little bit more about debate. I know that I covered a lot. So again, this is going to be recorded. You can always look back, or you can reach out to me or your coaches to kind of get some clarity on things. Before we end, I do see some questions. So Joanna, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, could you please tell us again when were the dates for the next debate seminar?
Yes. Let me push back to that. Also, I guess a correction. I think that I misspoke. I'm not sure about the motions being the same or different for each tournament, going back to Brenna's question. So I will look that up and get back to you all by Friday when those are posted. They may or may not be the same, but they'll be clearly marked either way. Maria Luisa, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry, it's not about debates, but if we are going to say something and we just freeze, what to do, because I'm really nervous sometimes and I don't know what to do when I freeze and my mind just go off.
Okay, that's a great question. And I will, I'm going to answer you in just 1 second, but I will let other people go that are finished just because our hour's up. So for those of you who are all set, you are welcome to leave. Again, thank you so much. If you have any other questions, feel free to email that email address I put above. And I hope to see you all next week. For those that still have questions, I'll be sticking around to answer them, such as Maria Luisa's, because that is a very good question. Thank you, everyone. Okay, Maria Luisa, so your question is what to do when you freeze or you get really nervous. And I think that that happens a lot to everybody, especially people that are starting out, but also people that just, I don't know, it happens to everybody. I think the first thing that I usually do is to take a deep breath and just kind of like relax yourself. And then the next thing, what type of events do you usually do, Maria? Are you interested in doing?
Can you repeat the question because I don't think I understand you?
Yeah, do you want to compete in debates or maybe some of the other speech events?
Debates.
Okay.
especially.
Okay. So usually I'll take a deep breath and remember that it's okay to freeze. And then you look back at my notes to see what I was just talking about and then what the next thing is that I'm supposed to go into. So it's okay to pause for a little bit, look at your notes, get yourself reoriented, and either, start back maybe 10 or 15 seconds from where you froze or jump right back into it if that is what you're comfortable with. But I think that's why having notes or having that structure is really helpful, because even if you freeze, which again happens all the time, it's helpful to have that outline or that overarching structure that you can look back to reference and get back on track.
Okay, thank you for answering.
Yeah. Costadine, do you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask because I heard some conflicting information. Are novice and varsity topics gonna still be different?
So the novice and varsity topics will be the same for the preliminary rounds, and then the final rounds should be different for novice and varsity. But
Thank
let me
you.
also take that question and get back to you, and we'll post about that on Friday, because I just want to double check with the rest of the management team to make sure that I am correct.
Okay, thank you.
Victoria?
Well, I was going to ask if it will be said like what would be the motion before the round, like if this specific motion will be for the first round and this specific motion will be for the second round, or it will be just not said. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah. So when the motions are released on Friday, they will not name which round they're for, and they also will not tell you which side you are going to be. So teams will have to prepare both sides of the debate. And then once the debate rounds are announced on the tournament day, so for round one, you know who you're debating, you know what the motion is and which side you will be. Okay, any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If anyone has any further questions, feel free to email the info@best, or you can ask me next week. And I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you. See ya.
Yep. Bye.
Very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you and bye.